Piece, I'm going to categorize goods in four categories that we have in economic theory that we can use to classify goods to help us think about the best way to provide these goods or services. This framework depends upon two terms that we have to have under our belts and be very comfortable with. The first term is excludable. Excludable, E-X-C-L-U-D-A-B-L-E, excludable. Excludable means people can be kept from using it. So this could be done with the law, private property rights. Other people cannot take your property, other people cannot use your property, or they face consequences. So can, I'll hold it up in a minute. On my board I have, well, in cursive, but my effort in handwriting at italicized, is a bit of a strong word. They can be kept from using it. Well, they might use it anyway, but we're proceeding as if they can be kept from using it. If so, it's excludable. The opposite of excludable is non-excludable, which means people can't be kept from using it. Anyone could access it. Our other term is rival, R-I-V-A-L, rival. And rival or rivalrousness is defined as people use it, its use is diminished for others. As people use it, its use is diminished for others. This is stuff that wears out or gets worn down or isn't as good as more people use it, which is different from excludable, right? It feels the same. Oh, this isn't good anymore. It feels like you've been excluded if something is worn out or not the quality that you think it maybe should be. But that's not the same thing. They're actually different causes, right? Different causes for that feeling. One is you're not allowed to use it, or you just can't get to it. That's excludable. The other is you can use it, it's just not what you thought it was or what it should be. And that is, it might feel the same, but that is different. So again, rival is as people use it, its use is diminished for others. The opposite of rival then is non-rival, which means as people use it, it doesn't get worn out or it's not diminished for others. So with these under our belts then, these terms, we can set up this little framework and come up with 1, 2, 3, 4 categories that we might place goods into, these buckets. And of course, these are sort of definitive buckets, right? And there could be things that are kind of on a scale where they're kind of excludable, kind of not excludable, and we're just going to kind of ignore that. But, it's a model. It's not a perfect representation of reality. It's a representation of reality to help simplify things, to get us to some objective, and we can adjust as if we're at that objective, we can adjust knowing the assumptions of the model. So, up here, I'll start here. When a good is both rival and excludable, we call those goods, I'll shift colors just to make it look interesting. These are what we call private goods. They are not necessarily always provided by the private sector, but the private sector works pretty well at the provision of private goods. Again, these are goods that are excludable and rival. Okay, my go-to example of a private good is a hamburger. If you buy a hamburger, it's yours. It's no one else's. It's yours. It's private property. Now, I had a friend of mine when we were very young, when he went to college at IUP, and got a little rowdy, got a little crazy, got into pot pretty heavily, and even though he's an upper middle class kid, he chose to live like he was starving. He was not. He was well taken care of by his parents, but anyway, it's what he really chose to do, and I went and visited him, I think twice when he was out there at IUP. One time we were at their common area, it's called, where there's like a food court or something, and he said, "This is where I stole a girl's hamburger." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, some girl bought a hamburger, I think it was Wendy's. She was walking out with this bag, and I didn't have any lunch, so I ran by and I grabbed the bag, and I ran down the street with the bag." Okay, you're not supposed to do that. The fact that you're not supposed to do that, and if you were caught, there would be consequences, illustrates that the hamburger really was excludable. As I said, people can be kept by using. I'm giving an example of a time when it wasn't, because hopefully it stirs you up a little bit and gets you thinking. Because that really shouldn't happen, and if he were caught, there would be consequences. So the hamburger really, it's meant to be excludable, and it usually is excludable. It is also rival. Another thing from my youth, when I was in high school, my friends and I sitting at the lunch table, in high school lunch tables, we had this, it was a fun little game, and it hedges on the rivalrousness of a hamburger or a sandwich. So we had two tables, a group here, and a group, I sat with the other group kind of to my back, two tables of a group of friends. And if you were not focused on our table very well, and you were maybe looking at the other table for too long, and somebody could do this, we would do it to each other because we were high school boys and we thought it was funny. A funny thing to do would be to take your finger or your thumb, and as the person's not paying attention to their food, just reach over and just jam your finger right down through the middle of their hamburger. And then they turn around and go, oh, because there's a finger hole in their food now. And of course, that's great fun when you're 15. Probably should have been 12, but it was more like 15. And the whole, I like to think about things like, why is that funny? And so the conclusion to that question is because a hamburger is rivalrous. When you use it by pressing your finger through the middle of someone's sandwich or putting your hands on someone's food, the camera's good for this illustration, it really diminishes that person's use of it. It's still there, it's still theirs, so the excludability is an issue, different issue, but the use of it is diminished. And that's why it was a funny thing to do to your friends. So a hamburger is my go-to example of something that's rival and excludable. Now for each of these, I also have a roadway that hopefully you might be familiar with, or you could get familiar with pretty easily. So a road in our region that is both rival and excludable. So to be rival means one's use of it diminishes another. So that in terms of roads, that means it's subject to congestion, heavy traffic. As cars are coming on and you're driving on a road, if you're driving, I don't want to give examples because it'll confuse you with the different categories here, but as you're driving on some roads, say at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you see the cars streaming on, and you think to yourself, oh man, I got to get there because I see what's happening. Everybody's coming out from work. They're piling in here. As you see those cars coming on and you're having that sensation or that actual conscious thought, that is illustrative of the rivalrousness of the road. Their use of it coming onto that road is diminishing yours because you are about to get stuck with congestion precisely because they are using it. And of course, there are times when you're the one coming on. So one's use of the road is diminishing another. That's how it works for roadways. But to be excludable, the road has to have some kind of a toll mechanism or something where you have to pay to be on it. Or some I don't know of any other way, but something that some people are allowed on it and maybe not others. And that would be tolls. So a toll road that is both rival and excludable in our region or our area is the Route 50 bridge, or the Chesapeake Bay Bridge at Route 50. Not the bridge tunnel down in Virginia, but the one from Anne Arundel to Queen Anne's County. That bridge gets heavy congestion, so it's rival. But it has a tolling mechanism, and if you don't pay, you bear consequences, so it's excludable. So even though that's provided by the state of Maryland, the public sector, for our categorization, actually, it would make sense to think of that as a private good because of these terms that we're using in our categorization. Okay. So now I'm going to go down to goods that are excludable but non-rival. People can be kept from using it, but their use of it is not diminished by another. And so these goods have different names depending on the textbook that you're looking at. Some textbooks call these club goods. And you know what? I'm going to actually change my colors. Just sorry to change my mind on something. I'm going to go with a red here since I went with an orangish kind of color. Some textbooks call these club goods. and others call these natural monopolies, not to be confused with a monopoly in terms of being the only producer. It's slightly different. It's a natural monopoly is what we're calling this here. These are goods that are non-rival but excludable. People can be kept from using them, hence being like in the club. But they're not particularly subject to congestion. So these can be kind of tricky to give examples of. I'm going to go ahead and give you a tricky example because it's thought-provoking. Okay. In the 90s, there was early 90s, late 80s, there was a band, hip-hop band that was pretty popular called Public Enemy. And one of their biggest hits was called 911 is a Joke. You're on your computer, you could go to the YouTube and put in 911 is a Joke, and you'll see the video of that. The video is still out there on YouTube, I know it. And if you watch that video to pick up what the song is about, the issue at the time, it was pretty popularly discussed, was this idea that emergency services would go to some neighborhoods but not other neighborhoods, or they would drag their feet going into some neighborhoods relative to other neighborhoods. Now, emergency services, I'm talking about ambulances, they're really not they're not really not rival. See, they have a coverage network. I'm part of that in my summer job as a lifeguard in Ocean City, where if a municipality has run out of ambulances because there's high demand for them at a given time, they're really busy with emergencies, they have contracts in place and arrangements set up with other municipalities that they'll funnel in from a neighboring town to help. And they'll just keep funneling in and in and in from a wider geographic area. And so and I hear this on my radio in Ocean City, when Ocean City is down to like their last available ambulance in the whole town, because we have a lot of emergencies happening, you'll hear communications, the person operating in charge of our emergency services will say to our communications center, contact Worcester County and let them know we're down to our last ambulance. And that way Worcester County knows, oh, we might be having to start sending some of our units into Ocean City to lend them a hand because they're really busy right now. And if Worcester County becomes overwhelmed with all the emergencies, and Ocean City becomes overwhelmed with all the emergencies in the town of Ocean City, next call as that's happening will be to Sussex County, Delaware, and they'll start sending units down. They have an arrangement to help each other out like that. So they don't really get worn out with use. There's a coverage system that pretty well keeps that from happening. But the fact that there was that song in, I can't remember the year, I want to say 1991, that suggested this tells me that there must be something excludable about them. Whether or not it was happening is not really relevant. It's the fact that it could be happening that is relevant. It could be that the ambulances just don't serve some neighborhoods. That makes them theoretically one of these. Depends on the textbook you look at. This is the difference here. And I have these in red for a reason I'm going to say in just a second. They could be a club good or a natural monopoly because they're non-rival and non-excludable. The reason I put this in red is because other textbooks still call both of these categories quasi-public or quasi-private goods, because I'm going to fill in the rest of my table. Goods down in this category are public goods. And then the other one that's a quasi-public or quasi-private, meaning a blending of the two, is called a common resource, which we've explored in great length, but just not in this context. So here is the rest of our table filled in. Common resources are rival but non-excludable. So think of our tragedy of the commons. Everyone in that village could use the common area, right? But as more people used it, as more people put their sheep out there, it diminished the use by others. So that makes it a common resource. The air is like that. the waterways are like that. It's hard to keep people from using the bay. If people throw litter out their car windows, that ends up in the bay. How's it excludable from somebody doing that? It's just geographically not excludable. But when people do things like that, it is rival. That diminishes the use by others. So that's what makes natural resources common resources. Public goods are neither rival nor excludable. To define public goods then, beyond just these terms, I kind of have to use an example. The one pure public good is national defense. Think about that for just a second. National defense defends all of the people within a country, well or badly, however, whatever you want to say, that's your opinion. But everyone's behind the same curtain of national defense. And so being defended by one isn't diminishing, my use of national defense isn't diminishing your use of national defense. And you might say, well, that's because we're both right here in the state of Maryland, right here on the East Coast. But even my use of national defense isn't diminishing the use of national defense by people in California. If we as a country were attacked on the East Coast, sure, there would be more defensive provisions moved east, but if it was on the West Coast, they would be moved west. It's not rival as to how we're protected by our national defense. It's also not excludable. The military might like to exclude, I'll go ahead and say this on a recording, the military might like to exclude a military protester like perhaps Jane Fonda from their protection. But guess what? There is no way to do that. They're not going to take a person who doesn't like the military and is vocal about that and airlift them and drop them off in Russia or somewhere. They're not going to do that. There's no means for national defense really to do that. So they can't exclude people from the provision of the service that they provide. So the pure public service, public good, is national defense, and hopefully that example illustrates what public goods really are. I said I would give you a road for each of these, a road that you might be familiar with. A road that is excludable but non-rival, in my mind, is the Route 95 over the Susquehanna River. It separates Harford and Cecil County. I'm from Cecil County originally. I've driven across that many, many times. Rarely, although times are changing, this growth has occurred in Cecil County, rarely do I see a traffic jam over the Susquehanna River on I-95. It just doesn't really face a lot of pressure like that. It doesn't really get congested, although it might be starting to. Historically, it has not. But there's a toll on that road. So that means it's excludable because of the toll, but it isn't rival because it doesn't really get congestion. A road that is a common resource is one that's rival but not excludable or not tolled. Well, right near campus is 695, the Baltimore Beltway. And I didn't want to say it earlier because it was in a different category, but that is a road where I've been on that road at 3:30 or 4 o'clock and seen the cars streaming on and thought to myself, oh my goodness, I need to get out of here. And because I'm so into this stuff, I think to myself, because their use is diminishing my use of this road, which normal people don't think, but it's true. It's very rival, but there's no toll on it. So it's a common resource, and that rivalrousness is what scares me at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, particularly on a Friday. A road that is a public good, this is one that I'm going to have to push you to use your imagination for. It's a road, it's any road where maybe you grew up where you could have a basketball hoop, where the kids in the neighborhood could have a basketball hoop set stage on the side of the road. Okay? Anybody could use that road. People even walk on it. People ride bicycles on it. Anybody can use that road. So it's not excludable. And it doesn't get traffic jams, really. So it's non-rival. So any like small road, rural road, or community, suburban kind of road that is in a community that doesn't get traffic, that would fall in our public good category as a road example. So these are the four categories of goods that we can think about as we hear of new things or changes to policy where we're thinking about how to affect the provision of goods. And they're imperfect, as I mentioned. We do have some private goods that are provided by the public sector, but they're a pretty good way to really get in the weeds about these issues and to think, well, what does make sense to provide this good? So hopefully that will help you to do that.